because free people are capable of extraordinary things. And together, we can see an America that's reaching its full potential. Join the movement to empower every American.
Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it. My name is Joshua Solano. I'm the Deputy State Director here in Minnesota for Americans for Prosperity. Born and raised, grew up in Eagan, Apple Valley area my entire life. Joined the Marine Corps, came back after my service, started at the Minnesota House of Representatives as a legislative assistant, and we were in the minority for 4 years, and I felt like I needed to create an impact. Within those 4 years, my representative and I, we had only passed 3 bills. And I wanted to join an organization that actively works year-round, gets the community involved on the grassroots level to make the change possible to reignite the American dream. And so I'm sure you met some of our volunteers at the table. And my lovely grassroots engagement director, Maria Voigt, she is one of the point people on our team that you would work with and be connected with on our many events across the state. Last year, we conducted 56 events from policy events to meeting with legislators in district or meeting with, we know it takes time and money out of your day to visit your representatives down at the Capitol. And so those are services and just things that we can provide to help bring you the policy that happens in St. Paul, to help keep you engaged, whether it's through events or policymaking or volunteerism. What we do specifically is we have 3 buckets. We work on under the dome work that is policy work. We do a lot of petitions. We do a lot of emails. We call our neighbors. We call our friends, and we tell them what's going on, and we bring your voices to the Capitol to share with legislators. Oh, my apologies. Grassroots engagement, getting people involved, making the change happen. I'm sure our wonderful policy champions here today will tell you that many of their legislative ideas came from their constituents. Grassroots involvement is something that is important when our policy champions represent you at the Capitol. Without a grassroots movement of change and understanding of the issues within their district, issues with your small businesses, issues with your schools, and, or if you have a small organized community, whether it's through church or PTA and things like that, we help facilitate those things. And lastly, accountability. We hold legislators accountable through the actions that they take at the Capitol, through the votes that they take. And they can say one thing on the news and they can vote another way. They can say one thing in committee and then stand up and turn around and say they never did that. And it's organizations like Americans for Prosperity that take charge, and we will go door to door, we'll make phone banks, we will do events just like this to educate the communities on what happens on the policy level at the state capitol, because transparency under the dome is what's important. Some of the things that we work on is government regulation and government understanding of what happens with state agencies through separation of powers, through regulatory means, through budget, how they implement rules and regulations and how they spend those things, and encouraging our legislators to stand for good governance and, ensuring that the people of Minnesota's tax dollars are protected. This year, we have seen that there is a policy called the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that will expire by the end of the year. And you can see here in Minnesota that inflation has cost Minnesotans direly. And so when we talk about reigniting the American dream, when we talk about protecting prosperity, We want to help educate the communities and educate our policy champions and legislators on the costs of government doing business that affects the lives of all Minnesotans. You can follow us on social media if you'd like to know if we have more events. And lastly, we have, like I said, Maria Voigt. She's in the flower shirt outside. I'm sure she'll be running around here later. If you want to, have a day at the Capitol on us, we'll bring you, we'll set up the transport, we'll set up the meals. If you want to call your neighbors to have your legislators get to work, if you want to host an event at your church or at your school or with your mom's groups or sports groups or anything, talk to Maria. She will help you get involved within the community. We will find the mutual benefit that it takes to engage in grassroots activism here, and we will help ensure that those burdens and the costs of grassroots activism is not on you, because we know that it takes change to inspire courage. So with that, I want to invite our incredible policy champions, Senator Lucero, Representative Hudson, and Representative Novotny.
Testing, there we go. Well, good morning. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. Thank you for those that are online. Thank you to Josh and Americans for Prosperity for helping to organize and host this event. Thank you to Alpha News, and who is live streaming this. Thank you to St. Michael Cinema for allowing us this opportunity in this location to be able to gather once again. One of the greatest aspects of being a public servant is events just like this. Meeting with the constituents, hearing the voices and concerns of what's happening in the community to best represent the voices, values, and priorities of our great community down in St. Paul. As spending dollars, decisions are being made, as different policies are being considered, we want to do what we can to accurately represent, again, our great community. So thank you once again to everybody for coming out and for organizing this. I am Eric Lucero. I've had the privilege of serving in the state legislature for going on 11 years now. When we start on Tuesday next week, the legislature gavels in, January 14th. I will have, again, the privilege of entering my 11th year. 8 years in the House, and it'll be 3 years in the Senate. So one of the things that I just want to open with here is some of the things that I have been hearing from voices in our community that have reached out. There are a lot of people that have very serious concerns about what's happening for the direction of Minnesota. And as I was prepping, what I have here is a stack of headlines. These are just flat-out headlines from media across Minnesota. And it is these headlines that are helping to get information out that people in our community and across the state are becoming very frustrated with. But as I was prepping this, something came to mind. I'm sure you've all heard a variation of the following phrase. Hard times produce or result in strong men and women. Strong men and women result in good times. And if we look at our country's history and our state's history, whether it be the Revolutionary War, all the wars that have happened throughout the last 250 or so years, but then World War I, World War II, there are strong men and women that resulted from the hard times and the challenges that we've faced in our nation and state's history. But then, good times produce weak men and women. And then weak men and women produce hard times. And as I've received information from across the state, from people reaching out to me via email, via phone calls, via social media, via events live in person, just like this, that's the feeling that people have. We live in some very challenging times right now as the result of weak men and women that are making decisions that are contrary to the will of the people. So very briefly, some of the headlines. This is, you won't obviously be able to see any of this, but here's 8 screenshots of the Star Tribune. Now, we know we recently had a presidential election, and during that election, the vice president-elect now, J.D. Vance, came to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and made a statement, and the headline reads, J.D. Vance visits Minneapolis and portrays it as a city in decline. So I have 7 other screenshots from Minneapolis Star Tribune, because that raised a lot of ire. Minneapolis is on pace for the most violent year in a generation. Most of Minneapolis City Council pledges to begin the process of ending the police department. Minneapolis police staffing levels reach historic lows amid struggle for recruitment and retention. Again, each of these is a separate headline of the goings-on, of the values and priorities that those in power right now have been promoting and pushing. Hennepin County, Minneapolis leaders back Minnesota sanctuary state proposal. Minnesota is a top destination for migrants accepting free tickets to leave New York. Downtown Minneapolis still grappling with office vacancies and plummeting values. Minneapolis to look at new taxes as downtown values plummet. On the education front, CARE 11, this is statewide. School districts across Minnesota face budget deficits. The Minnesota Reformer, less than half of Minnesota students meet or exceed grade level standards in reading and math. Star Tribune, Minneapolis schools face multi-million-dollar budget deficits and problems. This is on the heels of the current majority under Governor Walz in these last 2 years manufacturing headlines of historic funding. And these are the results of their historic funding. Our students are being denied significant opportunities. The headlines continue. Minnesota's national education ranking continues to drop. Majority of Minnesota students aren't meeting math or reading standards. And then the last headline, Minnesota 4th grade reading and 8th grade math scores on national tests lowest in 30 years. Star Tribune, owners auction historic St. Paul Athletic Club building after it loses its last tenant. Downtown St. Paul, largest property owner, says the city's core is in crisis. This is from Commerce and Finance, for those who are familiar with that publication. Downtown Minneapolis office towers sell at steep discount. You may have seen this. There was an office tower that sold for 91% less than it was purchased for just 5 years earlier. Fox 9, property tax increases give Minnesota homeowners sticker shock. Property taxes on residential properties are going up as a direct result or contributing from the value of commercial properties going down. As the commercial property values decrease, the tax burden then is going to fall more on residential properties. That is among the reasons why we're seeing significant tax increases, property tax increases. Why are commercial buildings decreasing in their value? Things like leaders attacking law enforcement, driving down morale, driving up crime. The suburbs versus, this is Star Tribune, the suburbs versus Minneapolis. Where will restaurants go? And they have this because restaurants and business owners in Minneapolis, with the priorities and policies they have been pushing, are fleeing that city because they are unable to do business given the constraints and regulation that they continue to have thrust on them. Governor Walz signs a bill granting driver's license to unauthorized immigrants. Read that, illegal foreign nationals. That was one of the things that passed in these last 2 years. Minnesota enacts automatic voter registration. So the majority, they passed a bill giving driver's license to illegal foreign nationals. Anybody with a driver's license, anybody, is automatically registered to vote under the new law passed by the majority. Minnesota State Grant Program faces $211 million budget shortfall. Minnesota to provide free college tuition to undocumented students. Read that, illegal foreign nationals. This is from the Office of Higher Education. Resources for undocumented students are available for them. Star Tribune. Outreach workers say fentanyl drives surging crime in St. Paul's Midway neighborhood. From a national perspective, when there's a failure to protect the safety and security of our border that allows illegal foreign nationals to pour into this country, and then when there's policies and priorities that are creating a magnet for illegal foreign nationals, drawing them to Minneapolis and Minnesota, you then get a headline such as fentanyl is surging in neighborhoods. It's very alarming what's happening. Now, the headline, real median household income fell in Minnesota to its low last year. It's now $5,900 lower than it was in 2019. So the average Minnesota median household income is nearly $6,000 less today than it was before COVID, as Minnesota families continue to struggle with their gas, their groceries, child care expenses, and more. IRS data shows a net loss of 13,455 Minnesotans leaving in 2021 and 2022. Here's from the Star Tribune. This one was just a few weeks ago in December. Build it and they did come. Western Wisconsin sees big growth after new bridge. Why? With surging crime, with taxes, with regulation, with low education performance levels, people with means are fleeing this state. And you're seeing Western Wisconsin skyrocket. The headlines go on and on. But I'll finish with a handful here. The scandal tracker. How many have seen this? Minnesota, this is a chronicling of all the scandals. How many have seen the headlines all summer long of scandal, fraud, waste after scandal, fraud, and waste? Millions of dollars. And right now we're over $500 million of hardworking taxpayer dollars squandered to waste, fraud, and abuse under Governor Walz as a direct result of the Democrat control of Minnesota House and Senate passing policies with little to zero protections or controls.
That we know of.
What?
$500 million that we know of.
That we know of, yeah, that's a good point. Just a handful more here. During the campaign trail, Governor Walz, and this is from the Washington Examiner, Walz claims there is a direct parallel between Trump's rally and a 1939 Nazi event. Another headline, Tim Walz triples down on dangerous Hitler-Nazi rhetoric. Then, in the Blaze media, Tim Walz says country wasn't ready for his campaign's positive message. I highlight this because there are those that have a different value set and a different worldview than Governor Walz and legislative Democrats. And instead of working together, they used their one-seat majority in the Senate to ram through policy calling those that disagree with them Nazis and Hitler. And now Governor Walz is back in Minnesota after having lost on the national level, and he is wondering why his positive campaign message of calling Republicans Nazis and Hitlers didn't resonate. So here's the good news. The Democrat trifecta has been broken. Yes. There's another line from history that we've all heard. Power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. The Democrats these last 2 years have had absolute power. They've had majorities in the House and the Senate, slim. They have the executive branch, Governor Walz. They have the Secretary of State, Steve Simon. They have the Attorney General, Keith Ellison. They have the State Auditor, Julie Blaha. They have complete control, and their power has corrupted them absolutely. And I will let my colleagues explain some of the shenanigans that they have been using their corrupted minds to promote and create a constitutional crisis in Minnesota. But here's the good news. As I mentioned, the trifecta has been broken, and some of the things that we're going to be pushing for is returning sanity to Minnesota, which includes tax cuts, prioritizing real education opportunities and excellence, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Housing right now. There's a lot of good people that are getting crushed with housing, whether they have a house, they're on a fixed income, and the skyrocketing taxes are making them struggle, or it's those that are aspiring to be first-time homeowners and are unable to come up with a down payment due to what's happening in the housing market. HOA, you've probably seen the headlines. How many have seen the headlines around our community? Otsego, Rogers, in the last few weeks in regards to the abuses that are occurring in homeowners associations. So one of the things that will be a policy priority this coming session is to bring some long-standing reforms. And then energy, you've maybe seen the headline, it's right now in the Star Tribune, that there are data centers that require massive amounts of energy are looking to come to Minnesota, but given the policy priorities passed in the last 2 years, it is creating an energy crisis with skyrocketing bills across Minnesota. So with that, thank you for the introductory remarks, and I'll pass it to my colleagues.
Thank you. For those that don't know, my name is Paul Novotny. I represent 30B, which is the east side of Otsego, Elk River, now then, and the west side of Oak Grove. And I've been in the legislature now 5 years. I was elected on a special election in 2020 while I was still serving as a sergeant with the Sherburne County Sheriff's Office. I retired in May of 2020 from the Sheriff's Office, and now I've had my first chance to be in a leadership position. This first time to be in the majority and have a chair of public safety that'll be starting next week. And it's our chance to finally push back and refocus where public safety in this state should be. For me, public safety is one of the few things that are mentioned in the preamble to the Minnesota Constitution, and it needs to be the one thing we focus on, and actually keeping people safe and making sure that they are able to go about their life and do what they want to do to better themselves without fear, without crime, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to put the focus back on standing up for the victims, preventing further victims, and making sure that we do that. Tying into some of the other areas that we look at, and Senator Lucero really prepped it well about the strong men and women make for good times, and that circle that we have. Right now we're fighting the issue. If you watch Channel 9 last week, they had a story about the shortages of facilities and beds to house children, many of which have been deemed incompetent because of their mental status or because of their age, and we don't have beds and we don't have places to put violent juveniles, armed robberies, carjackings, and we just don't have no place to put them. And especially a Hennepin County-led delegation wants us to spend millions and millions of dollars to fix their problem. At the same time, most of these people were responsible for the problem to start with. I pulled up an article. Last week I went to the now closed Hennepin County Children's Home School. Big facility, 150, almost 160 beds. They closed that as part of what their vision of criminal justice reform was in 2021. And I was just shocked at the same names that are now bemoaning the fact that we don't have beds to treat these kids, get them back on a path to being a good citizen, get them out of their criminal ways, stop them from this violent behavior, whether they need counseling or medication or education. We had those facilities. They said that was cruel, and they shut it down. Same names now that want money to fix the problem were the ones that were on the same articles in 21 celebrating the fact that we're closing these beds down. So weak people make for bad times. We're going to refocus that. We're going to do the property tax cuts. We're going to stand up for homeowners and seniors so that they don't have to make up for the mistakes of the government. As Senator Lucero said, especially if you're in Hennepin County, a big part of your county budget was made from downtown. Downtown was the economic driver. They were the tax base. When you sell a building and you buy that for less than a dime on the dollar, your tax goes down substantially, the county has to make that up. And the only place they can make that up, well, there's two ways they can make it up. They could cut their expenses, which they're not going to do, or they raise taxes on the other people, the residents of Hennepin County. So we've got bills that would cap the ability of counties to raise taxes and tie that into consumer price index so they can't spike you, and that senior citizens won't be taxed out of their homes once they're on a fixed income in retirement. For perspective, when I retired in 2020, I went 3 years before I got any cost of living increase on my retirement. So in that time, I had a 20% reduction, which ties in almost exactly to the numbers you cited, in my purchasing ability. Now, I've got this other seasonal part-time job with the state that I do as a representative that helps a little bit. If it wasn't for that, I would be in serious trouble, because think about that. I lost 20% of my purchasing power right off the bat, and there's no way for me to make that up. If you were a senior citizen that was unable to go back to work and get a second job, would you be in a position where you'd have to lose your house or sell the place that you've set up just because of decisions that were outside of your control, and people in tall buildings have made decisions that have cost you to lose your house? You didn't do anything wrong. That's where we're going to start standing up for the citizens, the taxpayers, and making sure that the ones that have been paying the freight in Minnesota for so long finally have someone standing up for them.
Hi, my name is Walter Hudson. I'm the representative from the other half of Otsego, St. Michael, Albertville, Hanover, and Rockford Township. I was recently reelected to my second term in the Minnesota House of Representatives. The first time around, I was on public safety, along with Chair Paul Novotny, and a committee called Children and Families, where a lot of government spending originates. This year, I'm back on public safety, excited to get down to the work that Representative Novotny just described. I'm also on judiciary, civil law, and I'm on education finance, which is particularly relevant to the district that I represent, to this community where we're congregated right now. Education finance has been an ongoing concern for a very long time. In fact, I moved in to Albertville here back in 2012, got a home a couple of years later, and long before I got into elected office, I was on the city council for 7 years, but even before that, I was attending these meetings that have been put on an annual or semi-annual basis year after year about education finance and the tight straits that our school district finds itself in. It's been an ongoing 15-plus year problem that affects not just our community, but school districts in similar straits around the state. You have, at the root of the issue, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is the ways in which you're able to raise revenue to support your school district, specifically through levies. When a levy is passed in a community that creates new property taxes, those property taxes are generally bore a little bit heavier by commercial and industrial development as opposed to residential taxpayers. But when you have a community that has a disproportionately low amount of commercial and industrial parcels, that burden falls overwhelmingly on the homeowners. And that's the situation that we find ourselves in here. It's called property poor. And there are many districts that have this problem. And what it translates to is that you can pass a levy amount, like a total amount of dollars, for the exact same amount of money in Wayzata and here in St. Michael. And the person who owns an equivalent home in Wayzata is going to be paying significantly less for that financial benefit for their school district than somebody who lives here will be paying for the exact same amount of money, the exact same amount of financial resources for the school district. And what that translates to is that people who live in Wayzata, students who live in Wayzata, have less access to fulfill their potential, less resources to work with. Actually, it's the other way around. Here in St. Michael, than they do in Wayzata. So it becomes this zip code thing of where you live determines the access that you have to programs in your school that enable you to fulfill your potential. We hear a lot about disparities in the public discourse, and usually people are talking about folks who are on one end of the socioeconomic spectrum who need help for various reasons. But there's another disparity on the other end. People who could be doing better, people who have an unmet potential, students who could be setting themselves up for fantastic careers and being leaders in our community in the next generation, who are being denied the capacity, denied the opportunity to fulfill that potential. And that's just as important. That's just as much as a disservice, but it doesn't get as much attention because there's not as much sympathy that is summoned for folks not meeting their potential as opposed to not having opportunity. And so these are the things that we're going to be working on as a House Republican caucus, trying to finally bring some people's voices to the table. Because I got to tell you, I travel around quite a bit, not only in my own district, but around the state, and I talk to folks from all over, from every end of the political, ideological spectrum, every end of the socioeconomic spectrum, business leaders, school administrators, students, employees, the working man, housewives, and I hear the same themes over and over and over again. We are not being respected. We are not being listened to. We are not being helped. The struggle is getting harder. We're going to have to move. There's one policy in particular, paid family medical leave. You may have heard about this. It's coming down the pike, and it's going to translate. I won't get into the weeds about how it functions. Suffice it to say, it will enable employees to just basically abandon their jobs for any given reason that they can conceive of in their heads with no notice whatsoever to their employers. Now, before doing this, I used to be an operations manager for a company that contracted for a larger logistics operation. And we would plan our day to day. We need this many trucks with this many drivers to go to these specific places, and you're packing it out to where it's an 8 to 10 hour day for each truck. So if a guy doesn't show up, that's 8 to 10 hours of work that needs to be divided up amongst the rest of the folks who did show up. Or you have to pay somebody extra to be on standby, which is a tenuous situation. So that's the status quo. You throw this into the mix, and now you can have just 5, 6 drivers decide they're not going to show up. Not going to be able to function. And I heard somebody say teachers. Yeah, this applies to literally every employer. So your school district, your city councils, your counties, anybody who employs even one person, this is going to apply to. And what we're hearing from business owners when we talk to them is we aren't going to be able to operate under this scheme. In particular, I think we were all at an event, a Chamber of Commerce event nearby here, not too far away, where there was a business that what they do is provide temporary staffing. So they're the person you call when somebody can't come in or somebody leaves or you need to fill a space. And they said that if this law, this provision does not get changed before it's implemented, they're going to add Minnesota to California and Colorado, the states they don't do business in nationwide. So your people who you call when you need somebody because somebody's not there aren't going to be here. I heard another story recently of a business that moved to South Dakota, family-owned business. They had a lot of homes as a family, and they got together and they calculated amongst themselves how much money they would save over the course of 10 years if they moved to South Dakota. The number was $12 million. Would you move to South Dakota for $12 million? These are the types of calculations that people are making. And when they make those calculations, it doesn't just affect them. Where do you think all that money was going? It was employing people. It was engaged in the supply chain. It was feeding the economy. It was the lifeblood of how we do business. And the fact of the matter is that all of this seems to be just conceptual to a lot of the folks down in St. Paul. They don't see it as people. This is people that we're talking about. And again, it crosses partisan lines. The politics gets partisan, the rhetoric gets partisan, but the actual impact is people's ability to put food on the table, people's ability to pay their mortgage, people's ability to send their kids to school and get a decent education. And you're finally going to see your voice heard down in St. Paul. Now, what's the hazard in the immediate short term? Well, I'm sure you've seen the headlines. The Democrats are going on strike in the House of Representatives. Now, that's a fascinating characterization of what it is that they're doing on multiple fronts. Legislators don't qualify as labor workers who can go on strike under Minnesota law. But of course, it's political rhetoric, right? We're walking the picket line to prevent Republicans from exercising their constitutional authority that they earned through election. Okay, fair enough. And now there's all these arguments about whether or not, what the first day is going to look like, whether or not we have a quorum, whether or not we have a majority, whether or not we have the ability to conduct our business. Let me just assure you, and we can answer questions if you have them once we get to Q&A. There is no legal ambiguity whatsoever on this question. Republicans in the House have a majority. The number 67 is bigger than the number 66. Okay? That's clear. The Minnesota Constitution defines a majority, a quorum, as a majority of the members of the House. Members of the House. In order to be a member of the House, you have to be elected and sworn in. And somebody recently dug up the original debates that took place at the Constitutional Convention where our framers put together this document, and they explicitly addressed this exact situation and made it very, very clear that it is a majority of the members who are sworn in to do their jobs after being elected. That's a quorum. So there is no ambiguity whatsoever about our situation. Steve Simon is playing like he has power that he doesn't have. He is not a member of the House. He cannot just decide that we're not going to have a legislature. There's no constitutional math by which that figures out. So we will be conducting business on Tuesday. We will be organizing the House. We will be a functional majority until such time as the numbers change, if they change, because we've got a couple of election contests going on and a couple of special elections. And in this country, we don't predetermine outcomes and then organize our government accordingly. That's not how it works. So thank you for your time. I'm sure we'll move to Q&A.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that introduction. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you getting to, I think, the heart of what a lot of people around the state are wondering. My state director recently was quoted in MinPost saying, faking courage in the face of fear is not taking a principled stance. Many of the legislature the last 2 years during the trifecta had the opportunity to work in a bipartisan fashion, especially in communities like yours that aren't a part of the core. And, whether it's from Alexandria up to International Falls down to Albert Lee, they took the stances that benefited them most without the cries of over half of the state. And so I appreciate you addressing, what's going on at the state capitol, and to be honest, faking that courage is not taking a principled stance. And so as we move forward to some of the things that you were talking about when it comes to the solutions that you want to bring to the Capitol, to empower individuals for housing, to build strong and safe communities, to empower students to achieve their fullest potentials, to empower every single members of our community. I wanted to first start with a specific bill or a specific idea that was in your purview, whether you're a chair or a vice chair or a member of a committee, that you believe can break down barriers that is keeping people not only in your districts but citizens around the state from achieving that fullest potential. And why do you think that solution is something that we should have in the state of Minnesota? So I'll start with you, Senator Lucero.
Thank you. No, that's an excellent question. Breaking down barriers, empowering individuals to be able to pursue happiness as they see fit. Among those is housing. I already mentioned the Homeowners Association, also CIC is another acronym that is often used to refer to these, Common Interest Community. We've seen the headlines, and I am part of a legislative working group that has 17 or 18 members right now, a broad cross-section of stakeholders. We've been meeting for several months, and a report is due February 1st. So we've been meeting for several months, listening to people's testimony, listening to experts on an array of different topics, whether it be insurance, whether it be regulations, whether it be costs and fees and fines that are imposed, whether it be the ability for residents to elect the board members of their HOAs, whether it be the topic of communicating or getting clarity on information from board members. All these ideas have been brought up in this ongoing conversation, and the report with recommendations will be coming out February 1st on reforming this. There are many stories I could tell, but one of the most egregious that I heard of in a recent testimony from an Otsego resident who came down to the work group and gave her story. I don't recall which community it was, but she lived in a community in Otsego. And as we're aware, there are different monthly dues as part of a homeowners association. She was out of the country traveling, and I don't remember all the specifics of the details, but there were some unpaid fees, and I think the total was $56. I think it was related to the trash can. I think the trash can, because she was out of country, the trash can was not put back up to where it was supposed to be. I think that's what it was. So it resulted in $56 in fees, okay? They began the foreclosure process on her home for $56. It is absolutely ridiculous. So anyway, one of the things that I'm going to be prioritizing in a bill will be these recommendations to bring reforms to re-empower people that live in homeowners associations. Here's another statistic. Of the new developments that are occurring right now, the new home construction that's occurring across the state, over 80% of new homes being built are in HOAs. And there's another reason for that, but it's out of control what's happening. And so looking forward to bringing those reforms to that area.
Representative Novotny.
Well, I mentioned a lot in my opening that we're going to do on public safety, but something that came up this week that I think is ultimately important and touches everyone. One of the things they did in the last biennium is they came up with what your governor calls free lunches for kids in the schools. And, let's be perfectly clear, there's no free lunch in the kids. There's taxpayer subsidized lunches. And, side note, I ran into somebody that I used to work with at the county, and she does quite well. And she told me that, boy, it's really nice that the lunches are free. And I have some idea what she makes, which means she's paying for a whole bunch of other people's lunches. She's just not writing a check directly to the school district. And what that comes around is earlier this week, many of us went to different schools and walked around the schools as principals for the day. You get to see what's going on. And I've heard parents, I've heard people talking to me about the waste that's going on since they did this free taxpayer-funded school lunches. It's terrible. Okay, I didn't believe it until I saw it. Now, before I went to lunch, we met with all the fourth graders. So I had a room, 5 classes of fourth graders. And the one question that the kids had was, at the state, can you do anything about the school lunches? And every hand went up. That was the one thing. All these kids can't stand their school lunches. And then you understand, well, it's like, God, I grew up in the 70s. We loved our school lunches, hamburger gravy and man, they were just great. What you get now is a little cardboard piece of breaded chicken and carrots and celery. And what I was told is that since they have to cover all the lunches, the paid lunches used to subsidize the kids who were coming in on free or reduced cost lunches. So now that they don't have the subsidy of the paid lunches coming in, they've had to reduce the quality of all of the lunches. They used to be able to have broccoli and cauliflower and cut up bell peppers and good fresh vegetables. Now all they can afford is carrots and celery and some form of pre-processed breaded chicken, mystery meat. I sat with second graders and had lunch. Not one of them ate more than half, and that was only because hey guys, are you going to eat? You're going to have to eat quick. They didn't touch their lunch. I don't know how these kids are functioning in the classroom on an empty stomach. This is a case of we think under the guise. I'll tell you why it was done. The free taxpayer school lunches for all was so that our governor could use that on the bloody pulpit. How many times did you hear on the election trail, well, I gave kids free lunches. Kids can eat. That was baloney to start with. Every kid in the school that wanted it, if they were qualified for free or reduced lunches, was getting a breakfast. They were getting a lunch. But it was a lunch because of the other paid lunches subsidizing was something they actually ate and they didn't end up throwing away. That's something that I think if we can't feed our kids so they can't learn, I think that's the most basic thing that we need to fix.
Yeah, and that's the irony, right? Oh, there's kids who can't eat. So let's come up with a one-size-fits-all program that redistributes wealth that results in everybody not eating. There's another word for that. Call it socialism. That's how it works out every single time. We need to get to the point where we say, you know what, Lucy, I don't think I'm going to kick the football this time, right? And we have gotten to that point as a people. I think politics is a lagging indicator of where the people are at. And again, when I actually get out here and talk to you, and again, it doesn't matter what partisan perspective people are coming from, what socioeconomic perspective they're coming from, the people see the problem, and they're ready for the solution. Now, specific bill. So I look at all these issues, and I say to myself, what is the root of it? And to my mind, the root of it is the unfettered capacity for elected officials in the legislature to spend money. We need to put some sort of global cap on the amount of money that state government can spend. Now, other states have looked at this. Americans for Prosperity has looked at this. Other organizations. It's been implemented in some states. Ironically, Colorado has a taxpayer bill of rights that implements what are called fiscal rules, where they impose a measurable, objective standard upon how much a state budget can increase. And what that does over time is it provides and incentivizes predictability. And anybody who's in business knows, heck, anybody who runs their own household knows that knowing what's going to happen, knowing what your costs are going to be from month to month, year to year, is a big part of how you're able to set yourself up for success. Part of what makes the situation in Minnesota so wild right now is that you don't know what the Minnesota government is going to do next. How much are they going to raise taxes? How much are your property taxes going to go up? What new mandate's going to come down? These issues we're talking about in the schools, a lot of that is the result of mandates. Government deciding how you're going to run your affairs, as opposed to you, who's on the ground, dealing with the actual situation, deciding how you're going to allocate your resources. And so there are a variety of different bills that were introduced last term. I introduced one. Majority Leader Harry Niska introduced something that I think was actually better. We're working in tandem with some of these other organizations, including Americans for Prosperity, to kind of see what the best version of these fiscal rules to tamp down the growth of government spending will be the best solution for Minnesota. But I think that should be a priority, because if you don't tell the politicians no, if you don't make it impossible for them to claim victory by saying we're feeding kids, then they're going to keep playing these games. They're going to keep putting these theatrical performances on, pretending as though they've accomplished something, when what they've actually accomplished is the exact opposite.
I appreciate the shout out there on some of the legislation that we have. That bill that we have kind of took some parts of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. We call it stable because the volatility of Minnesota's budget spending in the last 4 years has been astronomical. And as a state, not many people know, we do not run our budget like a business that takes hills and troughs and understanding the past 3 or 5 years of state spending and then tamping down that volatility and bringing it to pre-COVID levels instead of unfunded mandates through regulations, state agencies, judicial deference and review when it comes to some of those state agency powers. So thank you so much for kind of laying out how you would tackle some of the hard-hitting issues. I wanted to take a question from online, and it was directed, you would have the best aspect of it, Senator Lucero, is with everything that's going on in the House, what is the actions that you think the Senate is going to take on Tuesday? Are they coming to work? Are we... what's going on from the Senate perspective?
Yes, well, thank you for that. Whoever asked that online. One of the headlines that I didn't give, which I'll mention here in a second, the Minnesota Senate has 67 senators. And right now the makeup, or it was last 2 years, the makeup was 34 Democrats to 33 Republicans. A Democrat recently passed away. The makeup as we speak and as we go into Tuesday, gavelling will be 33 to 33. It takes a majority, a tie vote fails. It takes an affirmative 50% plus one in order to affirmatively pass anything. So on 33 to 33, ostensibly, we're in a similar situation to the House until that seat gets filled. Right now, I'm not privy to the conversations, but there is conversation taking place between the two leaderships to try to come to some agreement on what day number one is going to look like. So I don't have any specific answers of what that's going to look like. I just know that it's under conversation and negotiation right now. What I didn't bring up is one of those, in that 33 to 33 split, one of those 33 is Nicole Mitchell from Woodbury. And here's from NPR News. As session nears, status of a Minnesota lawmaker facing criminal charges remains a flashpoint. Certainly does remain a flashpoint. She was charged with criminal felony burglary. And the Minnesota Senate, I was one of those that co-authored the ethics complaint against her when we were still in session last year. The majority, they supported her, the Democrats in the Senate supported her until the end of session, essentially to use her one vote to ram through an unconstitutional 1,400-page omnibus bill. After session, immediately afterwards, you saw the calls to resign from the chair of the DNC, Minnesota Democrat Party, and from others. And now that we're coming back into session, they're now circling the wagons and supporting her. And so the beginning of session is a negotiation, but it is one that I definitely expect some challenges as a majority, the previous majority, currently 33, were split, attempts to abuse power.
Thank you for that. We're going to go ahead and take some questions from the audience that they had asked before. I do apologize if you have if you wrote a question or asked a question about the current court cases concerning the elections in 40B and in, 60 as well as 54A. Our organization is a 501c3 and C4 nonprofit, so we do not, get involved in those election type questions. So I apologize if I skip your question. So on that thread, on that line, you have a tied Senate at the moment. Depending on what happens in the court systems with what we just mentioned, and when the House is inevitably tied, still with an administrative majority with Speaker-designate Lisa Damith, eventually we're going to get to this place of passing bills, passing policy, creating a budget before July 1st. So what do you think are some of the good policies that have potential to be passed in a bipartisan manner this year? And we can go down the line, whoever wants to answer first.
Well, I don't know if it's going to be policy, but we do have to make budget cuts. Have been in contact with people from inside to the budget, to the departments that I will be overseeing. And backdoor, there's already talk that the governor is pushing for finding reductions in the budgets. Now, the two numbers that I unofficially heard that could not be confirmed or denied by the commissioners is a small number. I don't know if that's a reflection of the departments I represent, but for the projected $5 billion budget, it's not going to be even a pittance. It probably wouldn't cover the interest for what they're going to cut out of public safety. We do have plenty of places in all of this spending that was done in the last biennium, the $38 billion of extra spending, including the surplus of $18 billion. And it ties into one of the things that Representative Hudson was talking about. We took, the Democrat trifecta, led by the governor, took $500 million and put that in a special account to cover the paid family medical leave. We haven't done anything like that. We haven't done anything with that money. We haven't started taking any deductions from employees, and that's one of the things that we could cut off right now. Not only did we take $500 million and put that in the pot for seed money, but they also set up, there's going to be an administration of 450 employees, additional employees to administer paid family medical leave, which in 70-some% of the cases is planning a vacation PTO plan that's already in existence. Okay, every county employee, every state employee, large corporations already have paid family medical leave of some sort, and now we're going to do this huge bureaucracy that going forward will have long-term cost. Conservatively speaking, I would say that just administering that plan is going to be probably $50 million a year. Never mind the fact that we think, by our projections, that the current deductions or the taxes that we're putting on employees and employers isn't going to cover the cost of the benefit plan. That'll only go up, and the cost of the administration is huge. We could axe that program right now. No one would know the difference. We could pull back that $500 million and cut substantial cost of those employees in that administration going forward.
I'll go back to the education piece because I think the reason why I think that there is unique potential under these specific political circumstances to roll back a lot of what the Democrat trifecta did in terms of mandates and not locking funding in silos so that school districts don't have flexibility. Because they had the trifecta, because they were in charge of literally everything, the folks who had been supporting them for all these years from within the educational institutions finally got to see what it was that they were voting for. And it turns out that a headline that says historic funding doesn't cash at the bank. At the end of the day, you need to have actual dollars in hand that you can use in the manner that you deem necessary to serve your students and your community. And instead, what they got was a little bit like, instead of you getting a raise from your boss, him handing you a bunch of gift cards to stores you don't shop at. They have money, but they can't use it on the things they need in order to operate. That's the situation. And you have a lot of folks who are scratching their heads, school superintendents, administrators, principals, school board members, and again, from across the political spectrum, who are looking at what they actually got under the trifecta that was promising them rainbows and sunshine and educational utopia. And they're finally seeing, this isn't really what it's cut out to be. Something needs to be different. And so under those circumstances, and you're also seeing this in other sectors as well, where folks who had previously been supporting one side are starting to take a second look. It's a little bit like that meme where the guy's looking over his shoulder at the girl who's walking the other way, right? That's kind of what's happening right now between Republicans and Democrats in the political economy. And there's a good reason for that. So I think we have an opportunity because that puts Democrats on notice. You see over in Senator Lucero's chamber, he's got a number of his Democrat colleagues who are trying to brand themselves as blue dogs now after they voted for all this stuff over the last 2 years. Oh, we're really interested in working with Republicans and suddenly being conservative now. Well, there's a reason for that. They're up for election in 2 years. And they are very concerned about the trends that they see, and that's affecting their approach to policy. Now, setting their motives aside, in terms of actually securing good policy, that's a good thing. That's positive. That sets us up to potentially be able to make some change in areas like education finance and like these mandates that have been pushed down that are tying the hands of administrators, superintendents, school boards, to make a real tangible difference in the lives of students.
One of the strongest motivators is self-preservation. So I think that's among the motivators why we're seeing that. Among the policies that I think are going to have a good chance, hopefully, of bipartisan support, I've already mentioned one of them, some housing reform. But another one would be Social Security tax. We're one of only a handful of states in this country that still taxes Social Security. Despite the broken promises of the majority these last 2 years of paying lip service to cutting the tax or eliminating the tax on Social Security, I think we can actually bring it across the finish line, hopefully this year. Additionally, I've already mentioned the fraud tracker. I think there is some substantial progress on bringing in reforms to stop the squandering of taxpayer dollars. And then in an additional area would be the nuclear moratorium that has been a hindrance to the advancement and meeting of energy needs in Minnesota. Small modular nuclear. When you think of nuclear power, I'm sure most of us might have a cartoon bubble of Homer Simpson and the giant nuclear power plant. That's not what it is anymore. Technology has radically advanced, and having small modular nuclear power technology is one of the things that we need to advance in Minnesota to power the needs of the future, and I think that is an area that there might be some bipartisan support.
Thank you for those answers. I wanted to. There were two questions in here that you had brought up that kind of along the same lines. So first, I believe that all three of you have been pretty consistent when it comes to Social Security income tax. So I will just kind of summarize the question of the possibilities. If you were to give it, 80% chance, 40% chance, what is the appetite, if members on the other side of the aisle that you have worked with, you'd mentioned the majority the last couple of years had promised to do this, and they fell short. And so is there an appetite to get that done? It can be a short answer.
Yes.
Yes, I like it.
We could, Josh, I'll just go really quick. we've lost over $5 billion in income that has migrated out of this state in the last 5 years. That's people that are leaving and going to different states, kind of tying into what Representative Hudson was saying. People are voting with their feet. We cannot afford as a state to keep losing these people. We have to cut their taxes. We have to make it easier for them to stay here.
Thank you. I would assume the other two gentlemen would agree. And then to the question of fraud. There was a question on how do we stop that from happening. I know on a policy side that can be difficult. You know, it can be difficult when it comes to regulations, rules and mandates from state agencies, cost-benefit analysis laws. It's very in the weeds on how to kind of rein in government and rein in state agencies. But how do you think we can actually do that?
So I'm trying to not go in the weeds and have a brief answer here. Generally speaking, the way that funding has historically been appropriated is the legislature will create a grant program. It could be in the arena of education. It could be in the arena of human services. It could be in the arena of housing. It could be in the arena of jobs and labor. It doesn't matter what the topic area is. A grant program will be established and allocated money, let's say $5 million or $10 million. Then the administration of that grant program, historically speaking, will be given to the agency, the department agency, to administer that is in that jurisdiction. So if it's human services related grant, it would go to the commissioner or the Department of Human Services. If it's housing or education, and so on and so forth. Then, when the grant program opens up, the agency will receive applications from those that are seeking part of those dollars. The agency will review and vet those applications and the organizations that underlie them, and they will make awards of, let's just say, a total of $5 million appropriated for a grant program. The awards might be $250,000, $300,000, and giving them out to the awardees. These last 2 years, the majority broke tradition, they broke protocol, and they eliminated or erased the controls that would otherwise help to prevent waste and fraud. Because when those grant applications come in, they can be vetted to ensure the protections are in place before dollars are sent out. What's happened in the last 2 years is the majority has directly named recipient organizations right in the language. So instead of being agnostic to a program and then allowing an agency to administer it, they are naming specific nonprofits. And when I say nonprofits, don't be misunderstanding that is somehow good. Not all nonprofits are good, and not all nonprofits are efficient. And that's what we've seen in these headlines, is nonprofits are abusing the weak controls to engage in fraud. So the way how to correct it is to return to common sense, proactive measures to ensure that dollars are not given out to fraudulent organizations and individuals. It is much easier to have an ounce of proactive prevention than it is to draw some headlines, as we've recently seen, to attempt to investigate and claw back money after it's already gone out the door. So that's the way to solve this waste, fraud, and abuse, is be proactive, have controls and vetting, and be a proper steward and fiduciary over taxpayer dollars.
I like to break it down simple, put it on something people can understand. We don't do budgets at the state level like you run your household, and we don't do funding like you would at your own household. When I worked for the sheriff's office, every winter we would have a string of thefts from fish houses, ice houses. People would leave their fish house out on the lake, and they would leave thousands of dollars worth of gear out on the ice. And surprisingly enough, they would be broke into and they would lose all their gear. And the simplest way to get your ice house not broke into is don't leave thousands of dollars worth of gear in it and don't lock it. We are losing millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to fraud in this state because they're stealing from programs that were designed to have little or no oversight, and then we just do it again. We tried putting oversight and reporting into every one of these spending bills. I was on Ways and Means. I guess I'm still on Ways and Means. We tried putting in every spending bill, and on every bill we were told, we don't need that. We've got oversight from XYZ agency. And then look what we have. They're designed to be stolen from, and surprisingly enough, they're stolen from.
Yeah, so a lot of the talk about how to respond to this fraud, especially from Governor Walz and the Democrats, has been on the other end of the transaction, right? Like after the money's been stolen. Then we're going to take a look at it. Oh, we're going to inspect the fraud. Oh, look, there it is, right? The actual solution to this, if you think about it in terms of like a hose that's attached to your house, if you really want to stop it, you have to go to the source. You have to go to the faucet that's at the house, right? Then you'll know for sure you don't have a leak on the other end. And the source at the house is giving all this money out to these people in the first place. Why are we doing it? What are we getting as a return on investment? How do we know? If you can't tell me how and why somebody committed fraud, if you can't prevent it in the first place, thanks. If you can't tell me how the fraud happened or identify it before it happens, how can you tell me with any certainty that the money that's being used appropriately is in fact being used appropriately? You apparently don't know. So I think what we need to do as Republicans in our chambers, and I know what we're doing in the House, what's being pursued by Representative Jim Nash, for one, is providing some accountability on these bills. They're calling it a fraud note, where you actually take a look at what the Office of Legislative Auditor has recommended in the past, and then you evaluate when the agency comes looking for their money. What have you done in response to these recommendations? And if the answer is next to nothing, that's going to be right there highlighted on the bill. And then legislators have to decide whether or not they want to keep that water running from the house through the leaky hose.
I think that those types of solutions, I think, are the type of transparency and accountability that we should have in the state. Whether it is fiscal notes, fraud notes, cost-benefit analysis, we cannot, at this point in time, just like when courts or just like when state agencies defend themselves in courts with their own expert opinions to sway court decisions, it's time to ensure that legislative intent is kept, that statutes are clear, whether it's the courts, whether it's the state agencies, whether it's funding. Abide by the state statutes, abide by legislative intent, and I think it's time to go back to those separation of powers. So this next question is in line with the antithesis of universal health care, and it's more about a personal option. So how can we address health care for aging Minnesotans that don't amount to universal health care? What are some of the ideas? What can we do, whether it's HSA expansion, direct primary care? How do we address the challenges that aging Minnesotans have when it comes to their health care?
So health care is one of the topics that I know all of us have continued to receive feedback on. The healthcare system, not only in this state, but across the country, is broken. It is broken. And in the healthcare system, that includes insurers, it includes providers, it includes pharmaceutical companies, and more. And in the last years that I've been in office, all I have seen over and over and over again is tinkering around the edges. I think one of the most dramatic negative impacts in my adult life has been the advent of Obamacare. Every promise was broken. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. The family will not pay more than $2,500 per year in expenses. Every single promise was broken. And so I'm tired of tinkering around the edges. I don't sit on the Human Services Committee. I don't have a healthcare background. But I do know this as a solution. We need to start at the foundation, at the core, and begin to rebuild. Because if we continue to throw more and more mandates on an already broken system, it's not going to be a solution to the good people that are paying thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, breaking their budgets, and it doesn't need to be that way. It can and should be a lot better. Again, I don't have a specific solution on that. We need to go to the core and re-examine and rebuild our broken system.
Yeah, I would reiterate that. I don't serve on the health committees and do not have a healthcare background, but I would just reiterate the same concept that at root, the real issue in healthcare is that it is the most socialized sector of our economy outside of public education. There is no choice. There's no prices. There's no shopping. There isn't the quality assurance that you get by being able to go from this store to that store and compare different products on different shelves at different pricing levels. That's quality assurance, right? It's you applying your judgment to what you're getting and how much it's valued. We don't have any of that in healthcare. Everything's dictated. Everything's siloed, in-network, out-of-network, right? That we need a systemic overhaul, and not in the way that the other side means. We need to go back to what works in literally every other sector of the economy: competition, choice, options, quality controls, market quality controls. That's the solution fundamentally to healthcare, along with literally every other product and service in the economy.
Thank you. And with about 10 minutes left before we can break out into meeting with constituents and, getting everything ready so that the movie theater can conduct its business, I want to ask each of you a question. If we wake up on Wednesday, what are the headlines? What are the things that you have done as taken principled stances and representing your constituents? What do you think that first day is going to look like? What can we expect? And how do you think we can come back from that?
The headline's going to be some variation of Democrats' tantrum as House of Representatives gets down to business and holds committee hearings. And that's a guarantee. I mean, we have hearings scheduled and they will happen. Again, I go back to how I started off saying that this projected ambiguity about what's going to happen on Tuesday, that is a narrative that sells newspapers, it gets clicks, it benefits the Democrats, it sows confusion, but there is no legal ambiguity about what's going to happen on Tuesday. The House of Representatives is going to organize, we're going to elect a speaker, we're going to appoint our different staff positions, and we're going to get down to business. And we're going to start legislating. That's what's supposed to happen under the Minnesota Constitution and state law, and that's what is going to happen. And so it's going to be manufactured outrage and questioning as to, and maybe some fake, really poorly substantiated legal actions, but nothing that's actually going to result in us not doing our job. We're showing up for work, and we're going to get to work, and I don't know what the other side's going to do.
I'll be there. I'll be ready to go. I'll be ready to do my job like people expect us to do. What will the headlines be? Well, it depends. If it's, the Minnesota Now Star Tribune, I suppose we'll get blamed. No, I know we'll get blamed for showing up and doing our job. I was on a panel Wednesday night with a senior senator from the other side of the aisle, and when this question came up, his tactic was to point out that back in 2006 something happened and it's like, dude, that was 10 years, 20 years before I got here. But if that's your answer, you made the Simpsons reference earlier. Back when Simpsons first came out, I had my favorite T-shirt ever, and it was Bart Simpson saying, "Deny everything, admit nothing, and make counter allegations." And that is what you're going to see Tuesday and Wednesday.
I expect the headline in the Senate to be, "There is no majority, there is no minority. Committees are set exactly 50-50 with co-chairs named, ready to conduct business for the betterment of all Minnesota."
Thank you so much. I know that both chambers don't have to answer to each other, so I appreciate there are 67 senators. Each of them have their own election certificates. There are 134 House members. Each of them have their own election certificates. So I would hope that all 134 members and all 67 members show up to do their jobs and earn their paychecks. It's a little bit early, but I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your Saturday. It's cold. We just had the holidays. The news is saying that, it's the end of the world, and I know it's a little stressful for everyone. But I just want to let you know that they're coming to these events, coming to these town halls, whether it's with our organization or where it's with the Chamber of Commerce or if they're holding something at a coffee shop, there's more to do than to just come and listen and leave. It can be as something as sharing this town hall online. Right now we are streaming from Alpha News. I would encourage you to go and share on Facebook, on Instagram, whatever you can do to show your neighbors in your community that there are principled policy champions in our community, not just with these individuals, but all over the state that stand for empowerment, that stand for bottom-up solutions and removing barriers and big government. So I would encourage you, that's something small you can do. You can get involved. You can host events with us or with them. You can have something at your house. I'm sure that there are members of your community that they haven't met yet. Have a wine and cheese night at your house and invite a legislator. Get involved with Maria over here and see what we can do together and hold our elected officials accountable, support our policy champions, and support principled policy. So thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to what is probably going to be named a historic session. Thank you.
You and I both know that America isn't reaching its full potential.
Well, inflation keeps hurting Americans at the supermarket.
Millions of American students are falling behind in reading and mathematics.
47% of Americans find it difficult to cover health care costs.
Some people think it never will.
70% of Americans generally pessimistic about U.S. politics right now.
I get it. I used to work on Capitol Hill. I saw the dysfunction firsthand for years. It was really frustrating, and that's why I joined Americans for Prosperity. AFP is the premier grassroots organization transforming policy in this country. I've seen Americans for Prosperity save taxpayers billions of dollars, stop special interests and corruption.